realfaith.org.au.
First of all, being the wife of the assistant minister and announcing to the church that our baby had a disability, that shook the church. It was really hard for people to know how to respond to that. And actually the best response was from a 21-year-old guy who just wrote to us and said, "I've just heard about Cody's diagnosis. I cried with you and I'll be praying for you."
Welcome to Real Faith. Conversations about the impact faith has on our lives and the challenges we go through. Helping us today and giving us hope for tomorrow. That's real people, real life and real faith with Eric Scatterbo.
When Louise Griffiths' newborn child failed his hearing test, it was obviously a cause for concern which took her family on quite a journey. However, as her son Cody got older, they suspected that there was something else at play. This began her journey to learning everything she could about being a parent of a child on the autism spectrum. And this eventually impacted her career and her desire to help other parents going on a similar journey. We'll hear her story today. Louise Griffiths, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm really excited to be here and to be able to share a bit of my experience with our son Cody.
Yes, well, thank you so much for coming into the studio. I'm very interested to hear your story. And the interesting part of your unique situation was that you had a child who had a hearing disorder, is that?
That's right, profoundly deaf.
Okay, so that kind of masked some of the symptoms of autism, is that what happened?
Yeah, look, it was really hard because having not known any other babies with a profound hearing loss, and having gone through cochlear implant surgery, and then having speech therapy from when Cody was 10 weeks old, all the way through to when he was in about 12 years old. A lot of his behaviours, we didn't know whether that was just a quirk of having a child who had a hearing loss or whether there was something else at play.
And meanwhile, at the same time, this was what you studied.
Yeah, so I was a primary school teacher before I got married to Cameron. And so I always loved it when they gave me the children that were a little bit interesting, a little bit different in my class. When I started teaching back in 2000, to have a child diagnosed with autism or ADHD in your class was very, very rare. But I always put my hand up for them because I loved them. And when I returned to teaching in about 2014, when Cody was 6, suddenly the landscape of teaching had changed. And rather than having maybe one child with autism in your class, now I found that suddenly it wouldn't be unheard of to have 4 or 5 kids diagnosed with autism in your classroom.
That much change in just about 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it meant that while I'd been away raising my family for 6 years, I had missed out on a whole knowledge base of how to support children on the autism spectrum. So while I was raising my own child and going, wow, there's a few unusual behaviours there, I was also going, I'm loving this information. I really want to pursue this professionally. And also, given that I really didn't want to work full-time anymore, to be a specialist in the education sector allowed you to work part-time. But I ended up getting a Master's of Special Education so that I could really hone my skills with children with additional needs, but also work part-time, which worked out a real treat, to be honest with you, Eric.
So ironically, your interest in children with special needs occurred before you found out that you specifically had a child with special needs. Well, you knew you had a child who was profoundly deaf, but you didn't know about the autism.
No, and even the profound deafness we didn't find out about until Cody was 2 weeks old. So we're so thankful the way that God has ordered things that I left Melbourne and moved to Sydney to marry my husband Cameron. And in 2008, Sydney was actually further ahead in their thinking about deafness in children than Melbourne was.
Oh, is that right?
I'm not helping the Sydney-Melbourne rivalry here at all. But before you're allowed to leave the hospital with your newborn child in Sydney in 2008, they did a hearing test.
Okay.
And so we were really surprised at 2 days of age when Cody failed the hearing test, but 3 in 10 children fail that first test often because there's fluid in their ears or they're just too little to respond. But when we went back when he was 2 weeks old and had the hearing test, they said, no, there's definitely a problem. He's got some kind of hearing loss. So that was at 2 weeks. And then at 6 weeks, we went in and had a 2-hour test. That was horrible, handing over my newborn child to a lady who I've never met at a hospital and watching them tape him up with all sorts of hearing sensors and then leaving him with this lady for 2 hours. And
Can you see him?
No, we had to roam around Westmead Children's Hospital holding a pager, waiting for them to page us to say the hearing test was over. The pager didn't go off for another 2.5 hours.
Oh, wow. Did they tell you what kind of time frame they were talking
No,
about?
but I was thinking, man, if it's going for more than 2 hours, this is not going to be good.
Yeah.
And then they called us in. I was so thankful that Cameron, my husband, is a minister, but it meant that he has a bit of flexibility on what appointments he can come to. So he was with me. Cody was our firstborn child, and we went back into this room with this beautiful lady who obviously held to the Muslim faith, and I hadn't had dealings with women of the Muslim faith before, and her compassion and kindness as we sat with my son in a little cot between us, and she told us that Cody was deaf to a level that they call profound. And my husband and I are like, profound? Doesn't that mean like great?
Yeah. I mean, profound,
like, woohoo, profound. But no, she then showed us a picture and said basically, if we were an aircraft or a jackhammer, your son would barely hear that.
Oh, wow.
And this beautiful, beautiful woman then took us through how we were going to support Cody into the future, how we start off with hearing aids and they wouldn't work and then would go for cochlear implants. And we had to work really, really, really hard on his speech and listening to get him ready for what we call mainstream or normal school by the time he was 5. And so I'm always one to rise to a challenge. So I'm like, right, we're going to get this kid ready for school. And we were off. That was the beginning of the journey, and we just set off.
We're going to stop you there. We'll get back to that journey, but first let's find out about your individual journey. Let's find out your background. Where were you born and raised?
I was born to parents who were in the Salvation Army. A lot of people are unaware that in addition to being an incredible social justice organisation, the Salvation Army is also a church. So I grew up in the Salvation Army. My parents were officers, Captain and Mrs. Skelton. I was the youngest of 3 girls. I was born significantly later than my sisters.
And I asked you where, but it sounds like it was all over the place.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I was going to get to that, but yeah. And I think also my identity as a child born and raised in the Salvation Army in some ways was more significant than where that was happening because, yes, every 2 or 3 years in the Salvation Army, a person would arrive on your front door on the 3rd Thursday in November and give you your marching orders, and you would move to that new place by the 2nd week of January.
Is that right? Is that typical?
It was in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, okay.
Now they let you stay for much longer. But so that allowed me to live in South Australia, Tasmania, Victoria and Western Australia.
So that was your childhood?
That was my childhood.
Good childhood?
Amazing. Lonely because my sisters had moved out of home by the time I was 7. But my parents were very faithful, devoted Salvationists, and my father in particular had a real heart for the downtrodden and the broken. And something that is really remarkable about Salvation Army cause, which is the word for churches in the Salvo lingo, especially the smaller Salvation Army churches, you'll often see people who are really vulnerable and oppressed and broken by life attending those services because the Salvation Army creates an atmosphere where everyone is welcome. There is no sense of how you should dress or how you should act, that we are all welcome at the feet of Jesus. And so I think that really, really heavily impacted me right through till now, that we can often find our faith to be a real theological, intellectual pursuit. But for me, I can't separate it from the love of Jesus to the downcast and the oppressed and the marginalised, which I think naturally feeds into a real love and care and concern for people who are born with disabilities or who acquire disabilities through life as well. So I think my childhood in the Salvation Army kind of set me up in this direction.
And your parents modeled helping people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my parents very much protected me. I don't remember a whole lot of people coming to our home, but a real situation that sticks out in my mind. I was about 7 years of age, and my parents were driving into the city. We're driving up Victoria Parade, and at the side of the road there was a lady whose face was bleeding. She was sitting on at a bus stop, and my dad stopped the car, and it turned out that she'd got into a fight with her boyfriend in the pub, and he had smashed a bottle of beer or something over her face. The glass had scratched her face. And I remember, first of all, being a bit like, because I'm sitting beside this lady in the backseat of the car.
Oh.
But also like, I'm so proud of my family right now.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of my dad that he stopped to help this lady. I want to do more of that.
Yeah. So they're modeling their faith. They're putting their faith into action. How did that impact your faith?
I really endeavoured to look out for the downtrodden and the oppressed. I think for me, I do, as I've got older, I've really clearly understood that it's only by the grace of Jesus that I am saved, and nothing that I can do can really get me to heaven. It's just acceptance of the sacrifice of Jesus. However, I do know that we need to make the Christian faith and the story of Jesus accessible. And so I feel a real call to make sure that our churches are accessible to people with disabilities, for children with autism, because if they don't actually hear the gospel, how are they going to come into a relationship with Christ?
Right. So that's part of our role as Christians.
Absolutely.
That everyone will hear. And of course, that means people with disabilities and other challenges. Well, we'll get to more of that, but let's get back to your story. So you're growing up in a family, and it sounds like you didn't go through a typical teenage rebellious period, or did you?
No, I was really, really fortunate, and also very, very boring.
We'll skip the boring part.
Look, I was really fortunate that after 6 months in a high school in Perth where I was bullied, we moved back to Victoria halfway through that year, and in prayer one night when Mum was really stressing about what was going to happen with my schooling, she saw a vision in her mind of the sign of Donvale Christian School, as it was at the time. And she really felt a sense of peace that God was going to make Donvale Christian School my next school. But we're moving back to Melbourne, and we didn't know where we were going to live because the Salvation Army told you where you were going to live. And we find out, lo and behold, that our house is going to be in Donvale. And then Mum went to Donvale Christian School with very little money, and they made
private
the fees private school. They made the fees accessible. They were willing to drop the fees to a rate that my parents could pay. So I ended up at Donvale Christian School in the late 80s, early 90s, and I fell in with a group of lovely, godly girls who it turned out were all as quirky as me, and lovely, godly Christian teachers, some of who are still there now. And so I managed to avoid the rebellious stage.
Our guest today is special support educator Louise Griffiths, who's sharing her life journey with us. Next, we'll hear more of Louise's story, including some mental health challenges she faced in her university years. That's all coming up when we return right here on Real Faith.
The Word for Today is Australia's most widely read daily devotional, designed to give you practical teaching to keep you focused on your relationship with Jesus. Read it online or subscribe to the free printed edition at thewordfortoday.com.au.
You're listening to Real Faith, Conversations with real people about how God works in their lives. If you want to know more about integrating faith into your life, our website is realfaith.org.au. Just go to the website and you'll find helpful articles about the impact faith can have on your life. Once again, that's realfaith.org.au.
Welcome back. I'm Eric Scatabo, and today I'm chatting with special support educator Louise Griffiths, who's sharing her life journey with us. As we heard before the break, Louise's parents were with the Salvation Army, and their example instilled in her a strong desire to help those less fortunate in society. Now we'll hear what happened next in her life as she continues to share her story. And so you grew in your faith personally?
Grew in my faith. I did well enough at school that I got to go to university, did my Bachelor of Arts. That's when the wheels fell off and discovered that I really had an underlying anxiety and depressive disorder that required medication. So at the end of my Bachelor of Arts...
How did the wheels go off?
I actually developed agoraphobia, so I couldn't get on the train at peak hour.
Agoraphobia.
So that fear of people in large groups. And, which on a 5 p.m. train on the Frankston line...
Oh.
Really hard to manage that.
Yeah.
So once again, my godly father to the rescue would catch the train to the city. He was was 65. He would catch the train to the city, wait for me at what was Melbourne Central Station, and then catch the train home with me because I had developed such a fear of anyone brushing against me, which is impossible to avoid on a train. And that's how my dad supported me. He would sit beside me while I was writing essays.
Because he knew that would make you more comfortable.
Yeah.
Wow.
Incredible.
What a
He's
father.
65 and he's just still loving and serving.
That's beautiful.
So, really incredible man.
Yeah.
So, at the end of my arts degree, I wasn't fit for full-time work. I wasn't ready to do anything next. A Bachelor of Arts, this is a hot tip for all your listeners.
Okay.
It's halfway to everywhere and halfway to nowhere.
So it's a good intro to
It's a
university.
great degree. If you want to go to uni and you're not quite sure what you're going to do.
Which is half of
Do
students.
a Bachelor of Arts or do a Bachelor of Science. And then when you work it out, you can just add what you need to the top.
I've kind of advised young people the same thing, but I didn't know exactly the terms to use. But start off broad, and then you can narrow as you go on your journey.
So at 21, I popped out of Melbourne University and I worked as a waitress at a restaurant. I worked as a nanny. I was a piano teacher.
Which was not your degree, I'm assuming.
No, none of the above.
But why? So why did you go into that? Just
because it was part-time and it was recovery. I needed to recover.
Did you recover?
I did.
So what does recovery from that look like?
Managing my symptoms.
Do you still have?
Yeah, well, interestingly, I know this is now totally not what you want to talk to me about, but
Hey, it's all your story.
I was actually recently diagnosed with ADHD, so attentive hyperactivity disorder. See, I distracted myself while giving you that answer.
Oh,
so
is that a good thing?
Which meant that yes, you can be hyper focused, but also become highly anxious because you just can't keep control of your thoughts. I think that was all playing into my experience of university, and after 3 years of being hyper-focused and highly anxious, my adrenal system was just shot.
So you needed to step away.
Yeah, and I had a great time. And then after a year, I went and got a job at an airline in customer service, so Ansett Australia. And that was amazing, actually, because it was a workforce that was so not Christian. In the fact that my Christian faith was so foreign to my workmates. The fact that I went to church, a lot of them knew no one who went to church. The fact that I chose not to drink alcohol at that stage, I was so weird.
Did they make fun of you?
No, they were wonderful.
Really?
They found it fascinating.
Oh.
They always loved to buy me a drink at the pub on a Friday night because I was only drinking Diet Coke. But it was amazing to actually, I was in the real world for the first time, and I had 18 wonderful months hanging out with non-Christians, not being scared of them anymore, because when you're raised in a church and your parents are ministers,
protected environment.
Very protected, and then you go to a Christian school and you hear about all the evils
More
of the
protection.
world, and
Can your faith stand when you get out of the protection? That's the true test.
Yeah, and in this case, it did.
You passed the test. Good on you.
And I got to be a witness for Jesus in real life relationships. And I think that was my first chance to really be an ongoing long-term witness, not just that random conversation on the train, but actually, I'm a Christian and you're watching me in the desk beside me 40 hours a week. My faith is on display. So, I did that for 18 months and then thought, I'm pretty sure there's more to life than answering phone calls from cranky customers. So I went to America, did an American summer camp. And
Why did you do that?
I
just wanted an adventure?
I wanted to do something different. I wanted to an adventure. I was fascinated by America. Everyone wants to go to Disneyland, let's face it.
Yeah.
And I found out you go to America, work on a summer camp, get paid to go on the summer camp, and then come home. So I did the summer camp thing, also run by the Salvation Army, also geared towards children who are underprivileged. Social workers would refer them to the camp.
So once again, you're being exposed to people who are doing life rough.
Yeah. And no matter how much kindness you showed these kids, you could never fill up their bucket, so to speak. They took every act of kindness that you gave.
Oh, they appreciated.
Oh, they were amazing. And most of the children were Afro-American, so that was also new for me. There were very, very few white Caucasian kids and staff there. So that was a really great experience as well, to demystify another cultural group that I hadn't really ever.
Well, it sounds like you just wanted to explore and
it was
learn
great.
about the world.
It was great. And then I came back and went, I'm going to be a teacher. And so I came back, and then having already finished my 3 years of a Bachelor of Arts, at that stage in 1999, I only needed to do one more year to become a primary school teacher.
Oh, okay.
And so, ta-da, there I was, a primary school teacher, where I taught at Donvar Christian College for 6 years.
The very school that played a huge role in your life.
That's another podcast in itself, Eric, because Donvar
Sounds like
Christian
there's a
College,
whole lot of other things I can talk to you about. Well, let's try to focus here.
But Donvar Christian College keeps coming around in my life experience. I'm now up to, I think, my fifth time where I've ended up with Donvar Christian College as an incredible source of hope and encouragement in my life and the life of my family. But that was round 2.
Okay.
So then I got married and I moved to Sydney, which brings us up to Cody.
So this is your first child.
Yes.
And then, as you said earlier, they had a routine hearing test.
Yep.
And that's when you learned.
Yeah, so we discovered he was profoundly deaf at 6 weeks. At 10 weeks, he had his first little set of baby hearing aids. And they are tiny when they're for a little baby.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about the Australian government is that they are very, very generous when it comes to supporting families with children with a hearing loss.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so we received support. We had therapists coming to our home every week for the first few months, and then as Cody got a bit bigger, we were going out to playgroup. And this was an incredible, incredible time for so many reasons. First of all, being the wife of the assistant minister and announcing to the church that our baby had a disability, that shook the church.
Is that right?
It was really hard for people to know how to respond to that. So some people would just say, oh, we're so sorry, what a terrible tragedy, what a disaster, yada, 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 which actually you don't want that. You don't want people...
Well, that's not what you want to hear.
Yeah, you don't want people to say, yep, you're feeling totally justified if you're feeling this is a disaster. And then I had some people who were like, oh, praise God, put some hearing aids in and off you go. And
Kinda
that was also,
it.
yeah. And then there was the people who genuinely wanted us to seek healing for Cody. But for Cameron and I, we just didn't feel that that was the direction for our family. And actually the best response was from a 21-year-old guy who just wrote to us and said, I've just heard about Cody's diagnosis. I cried with you and I'll be praying for you.
Wow. Simple as that.
That was so awesome. But then there was another couple in the church who were fairly new to our church. And she came to me horrified and said, if God allows the baby of the minister to be disabled, what hope is there for any of us? And for some reason, in the way that she saw God's kindness in giving us children, that we're promised perfect children. And
where in the Bible?
No, that's right. So that was a real stumbling moment for her.
So this really rocked the theology of the congregation.
It was a very, very public journey.
Well, we'll have to stop it right there as we've run out of time for part one of my conversation with Louise Griffiths. As we just heard, several people in the congregation of her church, where her husband was the assistant minister, they were challenged when they found out that their child was born profoundly deaf. As we'll hear next time, Louise takes great comfort in what Jesus said in John chapter 9, when he was asked, "For what reason was this man born blind?" Jesus responded, "It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins. This happened so that the works of God should be revealed in him." Louise realizes that there are kingdom of God purposes that allowed her son to be born deaf, and that through Cody's deafness, God's kingdom will be revealed. We'll hear more about this next time as Louise shares more of her story and about the journey her family has been on. Until then, I'm Eric Scadabo. So long, and God bless.
You've been listening to Real Faith, and if you have any questions or comments, you can send us a message through our website, realfaith.org.au. That's realfaith.org.au.
Real Faith is a production of Vision Christian Media.
This program is a production of Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, see vision.org.au.